So yeah, thanks everyone for taking the time. I'm Dana Wang. I'm the chief architect for OpenSSF. So I'm going to moderate the session.
Let's hear it for the chief architect.
Thank you. So we'll do a round of introduction before we get into the topic. Sarah.
Sarah Evans. I work at Dell Technologies. I work in the office of the CTO, and I do security innovation research. Last couple of years, I've gotten really involved in OpenSSF through an observer to our governing board member. I've gotten involved in the TAC and the governance committee, and I'm just very excited to be here today to talk about how enterprises can continue to consume open source software with the security that we've all been working together to partner with an OpenSSF to help build.
Rao?
Rao Lakkakula. I'm head of product security for developer platforms in JPMorgan Chase. My role includes the security of the developer platforms, also security in the developer platform. That includes securing the open source we all consume. I also serve on the OpenSSF board of directors.
And my name is Jeff Borek, and I've been working in and around open source for about half of my long IBM career, both in a variety of capacities. And as we kick off, if you want to hear about where some of the bodies are buried, find me in the hallway track. But I want to kick us off by, can I ask folks in the audience, if you're willing to, please stand up? Just quickly stand up for me. Now turn around to the back of the room where Krob is, and everyone in a loud voice yell out, "You're missing a great panel," to the hallway track, folks. 3, 2, 1. You're missing a great panel. Excellent, let's go.
Hold on. We got 4 people in.
That's a great call for action. Very effective. I think we boost the audience by about 1%. It's a great improvement. So I think this session we are talking about the security of open source. And we have 3 people, experts from different industries. So I think open source is the foundation for every basically technology in the modern world. And whether you are an open source maintainer or you are ingesting open source software into your organization, either produce business applications or producing commercial software, we can't survive without open source. So the security of open source becomes very critical. And we also have our CISA friends here promoting security, Mr. S-Bomb. And we have Mr. Brian Fox here, who owns Maven Central. So I think when it comes down to open source security, there are multiple aspects of the improving security. I would say let's start with dependency management. It is one of the hardest problems. No matter where you look, it's either in the software or it's in general in the world. So Sarah, what are the best practices you can give us, give the audience on when they ingest open source software?
Yeah, so I'm very fortunate to be able to work with our engineers and our product security to help improve open source security consumption at Dell. And one of the things that I recently did was worked to attend VolnCon. We had our first talk there, sponsored by the Forum of Incident Responders and Security Teams. And there I co-presented with our Senior Director of Product and Security Incident Response on the basic premise that if you improve your open source software security, you can help improve your product vulnerability response. And so our talk will be posted to YouTube. It kind of goes into Dell's journey and kind of how we did that process. But one of the things I'd like to call out in this panel is that we really, as we started this, we leveraged an OpenSSF framework called S2C2F. So what does S2C2F stand for? It is a secure software supply chain consumption framework. And so this was donated by Microsoft, started using this framework back in 2019. They donated it to OpenSSF in 2022. And I started to share with some of the folks at Dell about this framework. And we were actually able to use it to develop a roadmap and kind of create some plans and goals over the next several years to improve our open source software consumption, which includes identifying your inventories, your dependencies, creating a platform and a system, kind of the people, the processes, and the technology components combined around security to really help with the dependency management. And then that can be used to answer all sorts of questions. The one that's really important to us as we work to help protect our customers is what's in our software and are we affected when it comes to a vulnerability and incident response. So we've had great success. We're on a good journey. And I wanted to call out that if you haven't, as a consumer yet, looked through that framework, it's very helpful. And also you can attend the meetings and start to understand how you can begin to leverage that tool in your open source software consumption journey if you are consuming open source from a consumer perspective.
It's fabulous. So people, process, and technology. So Sarah touches on the process part. The framework helps Dell to establish all the processes. I think the other thing is, besides technology, I think people is the most important part in the mix. So Rao, I think I'm going to direct the next question to you. When you are the head of products security in JPMorgan Chase, it's a financial company. It's heavily regulated industry. So how do you what kind of advice would you give people on how to raise awareness among developers so you can set the culture in the way that security becomes second nature?
Thanks, Dana. There are a few strategies which are actually more relevant for an end user perspective, as I mentioned, for companies like us have thousands of developers, and also many developers joining and leaving frequently, right? So the fundamental approach we've been taking on that is like training and more training doesn't really work with the people. A lot of churn in the people, and also it's a once in a year or a twice a year activity. So the approach I've seen work with installing security and awareness is, first of all, bring in more transparency and visibility about security to the developers where they live. So what I mean was, start putting in these dashboards and metrics and are more details about the security where the developers actually start. We start with where they consume the open source packages. When they first pick the open source package, give more details about the hygiene, give more details about the package health. So OpenSSF has a security scorecard project, which is a great example of giving that score and hygiene details. You can leverage it, or you can build with your own metrics. The second thing is also giving more details about the package health in terms of vulnerabilities as part of their build process. When they start deploying to their own beta version before it go to the production, giving more details and visibility about all the components of the application pulling in from open source. Is there any new vulnerabilities? That would help. So my point is, incorporate more into where they work rather than keep it separate is the strategy kind of work. It's kind of really important with the recent trends for a couple of reasons. One, the open source package is growing, package counts are growing tremendously when Brian is in the room. Even if you take Java, JavaScript, Python, .NET, we have close to 4 million packages out there for a developer to pick. That's just the packages. But if you include maintainable versions, that number goes to 60 million. So a average developer have a choice of picking one from 60 million packages. And then when we see the trends, more than 95% of the downloads are actually have vulnerabilities. So you can potentially avoid 95% of the downloads if you're cognizant of what are you picking, which version you are picking. The other trend is we're seeing more and more malicious packages. This is no longer a package with vulnerability. the package itself is a bad intent to start with. Then we have typo squatting. The package looks exactly like some other package, but with the one letter off. So combining all those stuff, now it's not about like vulnerability management problem anymore. It's more about awareness for the developer level, right? When you have thousands of developers, you can't really go and maintain that each individual level. So that's where the automation comes. Then a couple of other strategies to install security awareness is, I think, embrace the open source and encourage them to contribute back. It's not just about consuming. Kind of encourage them to contribute code back to them, report bugs, fix bugs, also involve them in the discussions. So don't keep the security vulnerabilities attacks as a secret. Like open it up, have discussions with the developers, use that as an opportunity to teach them about how the security is important. And then finally, reward and recognize the people contributing to the security and open source. I think that's the way we can bring in more and more people to help us. It's not just a security engineer's job, it's everyone's job.
That's great, Rao. Thank you. So basically, to raise awareness and foster the culture of security, education, training, automation, and give back to the community, engage with the open source community. So I think that leads to the next question to Jeff. You have been with OpenSSF for a long time, and you have been very active in multiple committees. So could you share your view on how community engagement can help with enhance the security of open source and help end consumers to improve their product security?
Thanks. And I don't know why, but I woke up with audience participation on my mind this morning. So just a quick show of hands. How many were engaged in open source 7 or 8 years ago in their career? Just a quick show of hands. Open source. Of 75-ish people here, about, I'd say 80% raised their hands. How many of you were engaged in security-related activities directly 7 or 8 years ago in your career? A much smaller percentage, but a significant one. When I was asked to step up at IBM and take over management of IBM's consumption of open source and a process that we had to manage the risk, that was 8+ years ago now. And back then, open source was a relatively small percentage of the average enterprise supply chain. An average enterprise application developed 8 or 7 years ago might have used somewhere around 50 packages under the covers. Today, that number is over 500 for an average enterprise application. So it's just exploded exponentially over this past 8+ years. And unfortunately, that problem around the security of open source is a systemic problem. And so when I started collaborating with other organizations and entities 5 or 6 years ago on trying to, get the community engaged around this, we realized it was a problem that was too big for any one company or even a handful of big companies to try and solve. That this was really going to take a community effort across the ecosystem to raise awareness, to increase education, and to try and reprioritize and invigorate the community to begin to come together and take action. And it hasn't happened overnight. We tried to stand up the OpenSSF about 5 years ago and ran into the pandemic. And so it was kind of done on a best efforts basis without any real funding in the early days. And I'm really thrilled that by continuing to collaborate and generate awareness, it ended up launching a funded OpenSSF 2 years ago. And we've made great progress together, but we really have to work together as a community to sustain this progress. We can't afford to make a similar mistake that happened a while back when, who remembers Heartbleed, real quick? Yep, that caught everyone's attention and it got some activity, but after throwing some dollars at the program and some other good things were done to address some of that. But then everybody moved on and focused on the next shiny thing and left security as an afterthought. And it's very clear that if we're all going to work together to solve this, security has to find a way to be part of the mainstream and not just relegated to, oh, that's a small percentage of the community over there that worries about, you know, security, and everyone else can just continue freewheeling open source development. So finding that right balance and finding multiple ways to address this problem, I think is key, and you just can't do that without community.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's true. So open source, I think open source is the foundation of all the software. I can't imagine anyone in this room or outside of this room is not using open source software. And security carries the same weight as product availability, reliability, and performance.
Yeah,
so
one great example of that I know some have been exposed to, but I'll just highlight it as we start to transition to Q&A. Oh, and by the way, I think Dell's got door prizes for the best question, I think. Is that? But the engaging with the major governments on this topic 2 or 3 years ago, because they're part of the community, right? 2 or 3 years ago, they were very interested, but paraphrasing, you know, one person's interpretation of a lot of what we ran into was, oh wow, this open source has become a big part of software supply chains. What are you all going to do to fix this problem? And I'm really thrilled to share that the pendulum is swinging now, where many government representatives and regulatory bodies are going a slightly different approach. It's, oh wow, this open source is really a huge digital public good. And it's not just businesses or individuals that are benefiting and participating, we're consuming this as well. And so we have to find a way to collectively work together to try and address the systemic security problems of open source.
very well said, Jeff. So I think it's time for Q&A from the audience. Any questions?
Jay can run with the microphone if you have a question, if you don't mind. Do you have a mic? Thank you, Jay. Got to exercise those kicks.
Creases.
Hi, Munawar from Open Refactory. Hi, Bob. Hi, Rao. Hi, Sarah. Seth was mentioning in his talk earlier today that 38% of Python PyPI downloads are done with binaries. And in the post-XZ era, so I was asking him afterwards regarding how many of them bear some attestation or some proof of where this is originating from. And the answer was 0%. So in the post-XZ era, we are projecting that at some point, we should be all aware and start to understand what we are consuming, be it source code or be it binary. Binaries are even more dangerous, but even at source code level, where are we consuming? So how as a community can we start looking into creating proofs and then consuming proofs about where things are originating from and how, specifically, now SBOMs do some of that, but then how do we proactively search for future problems? SBOMs do for known knowns, but there are unknown stuff that's already there. So thoughts? Thank you.
I could start and you can add more. I think it's a great question. It's in the lines of, I think, some of the work Jack presented in the morning, like how do we actually secure the registry, package registries where folks download the binaries from. To your point about, I think SBOMs doesn't solve, but I think even the whole provenance and also the integrity verification and actually having a build integrity, all that is also key. Again, those from an end user perspective we would like to have, but I think it's a more something as an ecosystem we all need to build in the environment than the package managers and the packages ecosystem. So that's where OpenSSF, I'm actually looking forward to contribute and bring a lot of strides of improvement there.
Yeah, and if I could just add, what you'll see is an excitement at foundations such as OpenSSF to have some of these use cases that have started to evolve and to emerge. And now we can talk about, okay, where's the right application of metadata? Where do we need to get our inventories from? How do we get the data where it needs to go? And so you'll have the vulnerability disclosures working group, the best practices working group, supply chain integrity working group, all these working groups that were focused on a specific perspective are now starting to kind of connect to each other and to create conversations and tools within OpenSSF as we grow and mature and evolve as we work together to tie in the data points that are needed to answer some of those questions about the dependencies.
And I would just add to that it's a great question because it is one of the most vexing challenges I think we have as a collective community. The open source ecosystem has I think, well-earned reputation as being sort of independent and valuing their privacy and kind of like a little bit of a rebel culture to it. And, we don't want to squash innovation and we don't want to suppress, individual privacy, but finding ways to determine the efficacy and the provenance of key packages is going to become increasingly more important over time.
I just want to say something. I heard this code really, really good on XG, right? Because you mentioned XG. XG didn't happen because it's open source. Because it's open source, we detected it early and caught it not to go further. So I think that's the essence of open source.
Yeah, I think around solving the identity problem, I think our vulnerability disclosure group has created some issues group to talk about how we solve this human factor challenge. So that is going to take a long time to solve.
All right, we'll have one more question. They're actually at time, but had a couple of hands up. I wasn't sure who was first or who was second, but we'll have one more question and then we'll wrap up for lunch.
So, very quick, Sarah, you talked about different OpenSSF projects working together. You mentioned S2C2F. That made me say, how does Google for SC2F versus SALSA? And no, I couldn't find anyone that sort of described how those two great projects from OpenSSF relate to each other. Can you give us the quick summary about how those two things relate to each other?
Yeah, so one is talking about taking the provenance and the data and attestations, and then there's an opportunity to continue to tighten up that relationship and articulate it, because as you're consuming open source and you're working on a roadmap leveraging S2C2F, some of the things that you can do is make sure that you're leveraging, or your open source supply chain is leveraging SALSA and then sharing that that attestation data downstream. And so there's within the best practices working group, there's a security tool belt special interest group that's looking to kind of articulate what's that bigger picture, how does data need to flow in our processes so that we can get the right information at the right time and start to connect some of these different tools together to each other to get outcomes.
So I think to just add a little bit more detail, I think if you're consuming open source projects, SALSA, you can look at if these open source projects are using SALSA to produce build provenance. That gives you additional confidence that I can trust this software. And then once you ingest the software into your enterprise boundaries, then you can start using the S2C2F framework to establish different processes, and it involves organization level change. So that basically you can have this supply chain level of the adoption of the framework to help you to uplift the security posture of your project or your product.
So last question.
Sorry, I'll keep this short because I know we're at time, but organizationally, historically, it's been a problem, and this is my third OSPO at a big company, just to get funding and support for both open source and security working together. So I just wanted to say that OpenSSF is great to bring those two pieces together. So thank you for that. It makes funding those two things in a coordinated manner a lot easier.
Thanks, everyone. See you next time.